The silence that fell over my mother's dining room table that Tuesday afternoon wasn't the kind that comes before someone says grace. It was the kind that settles when everyone at the table suddenly realizes the person they've been lying to has finally figured it out, and now they're all trying to remember exactly what they said and to whom. I'd driven up from Charlotte that morning, 6 hours on I-77 with a thermos of coffee that had gone cold somewhere around Statesville, and a manila envelope on the passenger seat that I kept glancing at like it might catch fire. My mother had passed 3 weeks earlier. Pancreatic cancer. Fast, the way it always is. I'd flown home twice during the diagnosis, sat with her in the hospice in Roanoke for the last 9 days, held her hand when she stopped breathing on a Thursday morning at 4:47 a.m. I remember the time because the nurse wrote it on a little card and slid it across the table to my father, and he just stared at it like it was written in a language he didn't speak. The funeral had been small. Mom had wanted it that way. My sister Camille flew in from Seattle the morning of, wearing sunglasses indoors and a black dress that still had the tag tucked into the armpit. She cried the loudest. She always did. My father, Frank, stood at the front of the chapel and read a poem I'm pretty sure he found on a printout from the funeral home. My Aunt Maribel hugged me too tight and whispered that I was such a good daughter, such a strong girl, and I remember thinking that strong had become a word people used about me the way other people used pretty or smart about their kids. It wasn't a compliment so much as a job description. I want to back up. My name is Joelle. I'm 31. I work as a structural engineer for a firm that does highway and bridge contracts across the Carolinas. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Noda with a tabby named Margot and a houseplant collection that I take more seriously than is probably reasonable. I am the older daughter. Camille is 27, and she has been, for as long as I can remember, the sun that my parents' house revolved around. She was the artistic one, the sensitive one, the one who needed a little extra. When she was 9 and I was 13, she had a panic attack at her violin recital, and my mother spent the next 6 months driving her to a child psychologist in Lynchburg twice a week. When she was 16, she got mono and missed half of junior year, and my parents hired a private tutor so she could still graduate on time. When she was 22, she dropped out of art school in Providence and moved back home for a year to figure things out, and that year stretched into 3. I helped her pack her car when she finally left for Seattle. I gave her $400 for gas, which I could not really afford at the time, because I was finishing my master's at NC State and eating a lot of ramen. I don't say any of this with resentment. I say it because I want you to understand the soil this story grew in. The thing about being the older sibling in a family like mine is that you learn early that your job is to need less. You learn it the way some kids learn to ride a bike or tie their shoes. By the time I was 11, I was making my own lunches. By 13, I was helping with dinner. By 15, I had a job at a bookstore in town and was buying my own school clothes. Not because we couldn't afford it. We could. My father was a regional sales director for a medical device company. My mother was a paralegal at a firm downtown. We were comfortable. Solidly upper middle class comfortable. But Camille needed things, and so things flowed toward Camille. And I learned to ask for nothing because asking made the air in the house go thin and brittle, and someone would inevitably sigh. I'm telling you all of this because 3 weeks before my mother died, she asked to see me alone. My father had gone to pick up groceries from the Kroger out on Brambleton, and Camille was in California for a wedding she hadn't been planning to skip, and so it was just me and Mom in the den, the one with the old upright piano. Nobody played anymore, and the window that looked out over the dogwood she'd planted the year I was born. She was so small by then. The cancer had eaten her down to about 90 pounds. Her hands looked like a sparrow's hands, all knuckle and wing. She asked me to bring her the lockbox from the back of her closet, the gray metal one with the combination lock that she'd had since before I was born. I brought it. She turned the dial without looking. 3611. 22. The day she got married. Inside was an envelope. Manila. My name written on it in her loopy old-school cursive. For Joelle. To be opened privately. She told me not to open it yet. She said I'd know when. She made me promise I wouldn't tell my father or Camille that she'd given it to me. She held my hand and said, I am so sorry, baby. I should have done better by you, a long time ago, I cried. She cried. She fell asleep about 10 minutes later, and I sat next to her bed and watched her chest rise and fall and tried to memorize her face. I didn't open the envelope. I drove back to Charlotte the next morning. I put it in the safe I keep in the back of my linen closet under a stack of towels I never use. She died 9 days later. After the funeral, my father called a family meeting. He's good at things like that. Family meetings, PowerPoint presentations. He's a man who has spent his life believing that any situation, no matter how emotional, can be managed with the right agenda. He scheduled it for the following Tuesday. 2 p.m. at the house in Roanoke. He emailed both Camille and me a Google Calendar invite with a little note, important to address Mom's estate while we're all in town. ELS confirm. Camille was extending her trip. She was staying through the meeting. She'd be flying back to Seattle on Wednesday. I drove up Tuesday morning, and that's where this story really begins. The house smelled the same as it had when I was a kid. Lemon furniture polish and coffee and the faint mustiness of carpet that had been there since the Reagan administration. My father had cleaned. The dining room table was set with a pitcher of iced tea and 3 glasses and a yellow legal pad in front of his chair. He hugged me at the door. He looked older than he had at the funeral. Smaller somehow. He said, "Thank you for coming, honey. I know this is a lot." Camille was in the living room scrolling through her phone. She stood up when I walked in and gave me a hug that lasted about 2 seconds. She'd had her hair done. "New highlights," she said. "God, I forgot how slow the drive from Charlotte is, right?" I said, "Yeah." We sat down at the table. My father cleared his throat. He had a folder. He opened it. He said, "I want to be straightforward about this. Your mother and I had everything in order. The will was simple. I'm the primary beneficiary. The house, the retirement accounts, the savings. When I pass, of course, it'll go to you two. But for now, everything comes to me and I'll be handling the estate." He said it like he was reading a press release. Camille nodded. She knew this already. I could tell by the way she didn't react. I said, "Okay." "Was there anything Mom left specifically for either of us?" My father looked at his legal pad. He flipped a page. He said, "She left Camille her jewelry. The pearls, the diamond studs, her wedding set. There's a sentimental value there, and your sister has always loved those pieces." I waited. He said, "And for you, honey, she wanted you to have her gratitude. She told me that. She said she wanted you to know how much you meant to her and how proud she was of you." I sat there for a second. I looked at my father. I looked at my sister. Camille was looking at her phone in her lap, scrolling. My father was looking at the legal pad. I said, "Her gratitude." He said, "Yes. She loved you very much, Joelle." I said, "That's what she left me. In the will. Her gratitude." He said, "It's not about the thing, sweetheart, you know that. I want to be honest about what happened in my body in that moment, because I've thought about it a lot since. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel hurt. I felt a kind of cold, clean clarity, the way you feel when you've been driving on a foggy road for hours, and you finally come out the other side and you can see the horizon. I felt my mother's voice in my head saying, 'You'll know when.' I said, 'Can I see the will?' My father blinked. He said, 'Honey, it's a legal document. Frankly, I don't think there's any need to.' I said, 'I'd like to see it. Please.' He said, 'Joelle, you're being a little—' Camille said, 'Oh my God, Joelle, can you not?' Today of all days, I stood up. I walked back out to my car. I opened the trunk. The manila envelope was in my work bag, where I'd put it that morning, because something in me had known I should bring it. I'd known the way you know to bring an umbrella when the sky has that particular yellow tint. I came back inside. They were both still at the table. I sat down. I set the envelope in front of me. I didn't open it. I said, "Mom gave me something 3 weeks before she died. She asked me not to open it until I knew I needed to. I think I need to now." My father's face did something I'd never seen it do before. It went still, not blank. Still, not blank. like a pond when the wind drops. Camille said, "What is that?" I said, "I don't know yet. Let's find out." I opened the envelope. There were 3 things inside. A handwritten letter, 4 pages long, folded into thirds. A photocopy of a bank statement from a Wells Fargo account I had never heard of, and a manila folder containing what looked like loan documents. 6 of them, signed and dated and notarized, going back to 2019. I read the letter first. I won't tell you everything it said. Some of it was just for me, but I'll tell you the part that mattered for that afternoon because they were sitting right there and they needed to hear it. My mother had been giving Camille money, a lot of money. Not gifts, loans, promissory notes that she had insisted my sister sign every time, going back 6 years, because she had hoped, on some level, that the formality of the paperwork would make Camille take it seriously and eventually start paying it back. She never did. The total by the time my mother got sick was just over $240,000. Where had the money come from? That was the part that made me put the letter down and stand up and walk to the window and look out at the dogwood for a minute, because I needed my hands to stop shaking. It had come from me. When I was 23, I'd inherited money from my grandmother, my mother's mother. $48,000. I'd been in grad school. I didn't need it right then. My mother had said very gently, "Honey, would you let me hold on to it for you? I can put it in a money market account, it'll grow. You'll have a nice down payment for a house someday." I'd said yes. Every year for the next 8 years, around tax time, my mother had sent me a statement showing the balance. The number went up. By the time she got sick, that balance on paper was a little over $71,000. The account, according to the Wells Fargo statement in my hand, contained $1,143. The money had been going, in chunks, to Camille, to pay her rent in Seattle when she lost the marketing job at the boutique agency in 2020, to cover her credit cards in 2021, to bail her out of a lease she couldn't afford in 2022, to pay for a wellness retreat in Sedona in 2022, to pay for a wellness retreat in Sedona in 2023, to put a down payment on a Subaru she totaled 6 months later, to pay her car insurance and her phone bill, and, near the end, just to deposit into her checking account so she could keep freelancing instead of getting a real job. My mother had signed every check. My mother had also kept every receipt, every signed promissory note, and every bank record, and she had stapled them together and put them in this envelope and given them to me 3 weeks before she died. There was a line in the letter that I read 3 times. I told myself I was protecting her. I told myself I was buying her time. I know now I was stealing from you. I am sorrier than I can say. The signed notes are yours. Do with them what you need to. I sat back down at the dining room table. My father was watching me. His face was the color of the iced tea in the pitcher. Camille had stopped scrolling. She was looking at the folder in my hands. I said, "Did either of you know about this?" My father said very slowly, "Honey, your mother and I made decisions together about how to support this family. Camille has had a harder time than you have, and," I said, "did you know she was taking it from my account?" He didn't answer. Camille said, "What account?" I looked at her. I said, "Grandma Eleanor left me $48,000 when I was 23. Mom was holding it for me. With interest, it should be around $71,000. The account has $1,100 in it." Camille said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I slid one of the promissory notes across the table. It was for $15,000, dated April 2021, signed Camille Rose Whitford in the bottom right corner, her signature unmistakable, the way she draws that little loop on her R. She looked at it. She looked at me. She looked at our father. She said, "Dad." He said, "Camille, sweetheart, why don't we step into the kitchen for I said, "No, we're not stepping into the kitchen." I said, "Camille." "Did you know where the money was coming from?" She said, "Mom said it was a gift. She said you guys had agreed." I said, "We had not agreed." She said, "I didn't know." And I almost believed her. Almost. But then I looked at the dates on the notes, and I looked at the amounts, and I thought about every Thanksgiving for the last 6 years, every Christmas, every time I'd come home, and my sister had had a new bag or new boots, or been planning a trip to Tulum, and I thought, you knew. You may not have known the source, but you knew there was a source, and you never asked. I said, 6 years, Camille. $240,000. You never wondered. She didn't answer. I turned to my father. I said, and you? You knew. He said, Joël, this is not the time. I said, Dad, in the will. Today. You sat across from me and told me my mother left me her gratitude. While you sat on the knowledge that you and she had drained an account in my name to bankroll my sister's lifestyle for 6 years. He said, that money was always meant for the family. I said, that money was left to me, specifically. By name. In a will. He said, Joël, you are doing fine. You have a good job. You have your apartment. Camille has had a harder. I said, stop. I said it quietly. I didn't yell. I have never yelled at my father in my life. I didn't start that day. I said, stop saying she has had a harder time. She has not had a harder time. She has had a different time. Because every time something has been difficult, the two of you have rolled in like a Brinks truck and made it not difficult. That is not the same as hardship. That is the opposite of hardship. The room was very quiet. I said, I want to ask both of you a question, and I want you to actually think before you answer. When was the last time either of you asked me how I was doing? Not how work was. Not whether I was seeing anyone. How I was, as a person. Neither of them answered. I said, Mom asked me. 3 weeks ago. In the den. She told me she was sorry. She told me she had not done right by me. She told me a long time ago. She knew. She'd known for years, and she'd been too afraid of upsetting the balance of this house to say it out loud. I picked up the folder. I closed it. I put it back in the envelope with the letter and the bank statement. I held it in my lap. I said, here's what's going to happen. I am going to take this envelope to an attorney in Charlotte on Monday morning. I have a friend from undergrad who does estate law. She'll know what to do. My father said, Joël, please, don't make this into a legal. I said, Dad, it is already a legal matter. It became a legal matter when Mom signed the first promissory note in 2019. She left me a paper trail because she wanted me to have a paper trail. I looked at my sister. I said, Camille, I'm not going to ruin you. I'm not going to garnish your wages. I'm not going to take you to court. What I am going to do is have my attorney send you a payment plan, a real one. The notes are valid. You signed them. You are going to start paying them back, $25 a month if that's what you can afford. But you are going to start. And when you finish, 20 or 30 years from now, we can talk about whether we have a relationship. She started crying. The pretty crying. The kind with a lower lip. She said, Joël, you can't be serious. We're sisters. I said, we are. That's what makes this so sad. I looked at my father. I said, Dad, you have a choice to make. The grandmother's money was not yours to give away. Mom acknowledged that in writing. You can sit down with me and my attorney and figure out a way to make it right, or I can have her start a separate action against the estate that you are currently the sole beneficiary of. He said, you would sue your own father. I said, I would protect what is mine. Mom asked me to, in writing. I stood up. I said, I'm going to drive back to Charlotte tonight. I have work in the morning. I'm not going to stay for dinner. I'm not angry. I want you both to hear that. I am not angry. I want you both to hear that. I am not angry. I am done. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant walking out of that house. I didn't. I felt the way you feel after a long surgery you've been dreading for months. Tired. Hollowed out. A little cold. My hands were shaking by the time I got to my car. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. My father came out about 3 minutes in. He stood by the driver's side window. I rolled it down. He said, Joël, I am asking you, Please, don't do this. I said, Dad, I love you. I have always loved you. I hope you'll be okay. But I'm not the one doing this. I'm just the one finally not pretending it isn't happening. He stood there a long moment. Then he nodded. Just once? And he walked back inside. I pulled out of the driveway at 4:15 p.m. The dogwood in the front yard had finished blooming. The petals were on the grass like somebody had spilled a wedding. I drove home. I want to tell you what happened after, because I know that's the part most people want to know. The aftermath. The justice. Whether the story landed where the story needed to land. My friend Priya, the one who does estate law, took the case. She is a small woman with a very calm voice and a very long memory. She read the letter from my mother 3 times. She held the promissory notes up to the light. She made photocopies. She said, Joelle, your mother gave you a gift. A very thorough gift. We're going to honor it. The estate proceedings took 14 months. My father fought parts of it. Not all of it. He stopped at a certain point when his own attorney explained to him what was likely to come out in discovery. We settled. He repaid the $71,000 from the inheritance account, plus the interest that should have accrued. He agreed not to contest the promissory notes. Camille was sent a structured payment plan by Priya's office. The first check for $200 arrived in October. The second one bounced. The third one came 2 months later for $50. She's paid back, as of today, just under $900 of the $240,000. I don't know if she'll ever finish. That isn't, I think, the point. I haven't spoken to my father in almost 2 years. I sent him a card on his birthday last year. He sent one back. They sit on a shelf in my apartment, both of them, near a photograph of my mother holding me when I was about 6 months old. She is laughing in the photograph. I am laughing back at her. My father took the picture. I haven't spoken to Camille at all. Last I heard, from a cousin, she's living in Portland now and selling something on Etsy. I hope she's all right. I do. I hope she finds the thing in herself she has been outsourcing to other people her whole life. I hope she finds it without burning anyone else down to do it. The $71,000 sits in a savings account at a credit union here in Charlotte. I haven't spent any of it. I think about my grandmother, who I barely remember, and I think about what she might have wanted me to do with it, and I haven't quite figured that part out yet. I'll know when. That's something I learned from my mother. You will know when. I want to say one more thing, and then I'm going to stop. The night after that meeting at my father's house, I drove the 6 hours back to Charlotte. I got home around 11. Margot was furious with me for being gone all day. I fed her. I poured a glass of wine I didn't end up drinking. I sat on my couch and I read my mother's letter again, all 4 pages, slowly. Near the end she wrote this. Joelle, you have spent your whole life being good at not needing anything. I want you to know that this was not a virtue we cultivated in you. It was a wound we caused. The strongest thing I ever saw you do was the work of being the daughter we didn't deserve. The bravest thing you could do now is stop. Stop being strong for us. Stop being easy. Stop being grateful for crumbs. You are allowed to want things. You are allowed to ask for them. You are allowed to leave a room where the answer is no. I folded the letter. I put it back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the safe in the linen closet, under the towels I never use. Then I turned off the lamp and I sat in the dark on my couch, and for the first time in I cannot tell you how long, I didn't feel like the strong one, or the easy one, or the grateful one. I felt like a daughter whose mother had loved her. In the end, enough to tell her the truth. I sat there for a long time. Then I went to bed. I think about that Tuesday afternoon a lot. Not the way you'd think. Not with anger. With a kind of quiet wonder at how long I sat at that dining room table before I ever once asked to see a piece of paper. I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree in engineering. I designed bridges for a living, and it had never once occurred to me in 8 years to ask my mother for a statement on the account she was holding for me. Not because I didn't know how to ask, because somewhere along the way I'd been taught that asking was a kind of accusation, and accusations were the one thing our family didn't survive. That's the thing I want to say, if I'm being honest. The money was never really the point. The money was the proof. The point was that I had spent 31 years being the kind of daughter who didn't make things harder, and the people I loved had quietly built a life on top of that arrangement, and none of us had ever said it out loud. My mother knew. She knew for years, and the bravery she found at the end of her life sliding that envelope across to me wasn't about catching anyone. It was about handing me back a thing I'd given away when I was too young to know I was giving it. Causes have effects. That's the part nobody warned me about. When you teach a child that her needs are an inconvenience, she will grow up and arrange her whole life around not being inconvenient, and then one day she will sit at a table while people she loves explain that her share of a family is gratitude, and she will almost nod and say thank you. That's how it works. That's the mess of it. The wound makes the shape, and the shape makes the life. What I had to learn, slowly, and I'm still learning, is that being good is not the same as being silent. My mother spent her whole life trying to keep the peace, and what she actually kept was a secret, and the secret cost her more in the end than any fight ever would have. There is a kind of strength people praise that is really just a willingness to disappear, and there is another kind, the harder kind, that requires you to stand up at a table and say, "No, this is mine. I see what you did. I am not going to pretend anymore. I don't know if Camille will ever pay me back. I don't think that's what this was ever about. I know that my father and I may never sit in a room together again, and I have made my peace with that, because the room we used to sit in was built on something that wasn't true. I think a great deal about my grandmother now. I think about my mother. I think about the woman I want to be when I am old, and whether I will have the courage they almost had to tell the truth before it's too late. You are allowed to want things. That part I'm still practicing.